So last week I spent a bit of time talking about that. I think it was the income statement of McCormick and Company. I just picked a company again. It's one that's been on my radar that I haven't pulled the trigger on, but I kind of follow it a little bit. Again, I want to show you some things that I look for, and that I'll look for in your papers. It's important while I'm going to find and look at some things that I think are big transactions or big items that you need to report on. It's also important to remember to put in your paper the basics too. We looked at the income statement, right? Pretty steady growth, little jump up here maybe in the trailing 12 months. Interesting, good, right? All that stuff's wonderful. And you need to report on that. But then also look for these types of things, and I'll show you what we have here with McCormick. So I go along and we looked at the income statement last time, so now I'm looking at the balance sheet. We may take a look at the cash flow a little bit too as well. But I go down the balance sheet, cash. They had a nice jump up of some cash here from 2019 to 2020. That might be worth taking a look at, right? Little increase in inventories. Yeah, we'll take a look at that. I don't think those are maybe huge items. That cash is a pretty good build, but there could be some reasons for that you ought to take a look at. But I scroll down a little more, gross property, plant, not a heck of a lot, accumulated depreciation, net, not much going on there. It looks like they're building some plants a little bit, okay? But here, look at this. Look at this. From 2016 to 2017, they had a jump in goodwill from about 1.8 billion to 4.5 billion. And then if you go just below that, they had intangible assets of about 400 million up to 3 billion, a little over 3 billion. Okay, something happened, right? When I see jumps like that in goodwill, and you might see decreases too, or jumps like this in intangible assets, my initial suspicion is that there was an acquisition. If you saw a decrease, it might be that there was a spinoff, right? That perhaps they sold a portion of their business. Okay, but in this case, that's a huge jump. That's 3 billion, and that's not quite 3 billion. So pretty good jump in those areas, and we're going to take a look at that. But I just thought I'd scroll down a little bit further on here, and I like to use this FINRA just to get these basics down, and certainly you can use a lot of the information on here for the basics, and that's fine. But then we'll take a look at the annual report here soon. So long-term debt, big jump there from 1 billion to 4.4 billion. Geez, do you think they used a little long-term debt then perhaps to finance that particular acquisition? Sure. Deferred tax liability, I'm going to tell you that could get pretty complicated, and that might have to do with the Trump's tax reductions. Again, a lot of these other categories, not a lot going on. I'm kind of interested to see, they had a $6 billion roughly increase in goodwill and intangible assets, and about a little over 3 billion increase in long-term debt. So did they finance some of that purchase maybe with some common stock? Well, it looks like it. I mean, typically it looks like they've had 1 billion shares outstanding. So, that's a 60% increase in their shares outstanding. So that's pretty darn significant, right? Goes along, and they've got a few more shares outstanding here, but those growths aren't anything like that jump there. So right now I'm just kind of assuming that we made a purchase, McCormick made a purchase, an acquisition, long-term debt increase to finance it, and they probably issued some common stock to finance that as well. So where do I find those things? Well, first sometimes I just Googled, or I used Bing, but I put McCormick acquisition 2017 because that was the year that it was in, yeah. McCormick and Company completed its acquisition of, there you go, right? It included Frank's Red Hot, French's, mustard, which we're all kind of familiar with, goes good on Rocky Mountain hot dogs, and and Cattleman's Brands. Yeah, okay. So that kind of confirms, what my suspicion was. But then maybe I have to find some more information. And again, I just Google or banged to find out. I want to show you something there. To find McCormick's annual statements. Oftentimes, when I bang it, this one comes up first, and it's annualreports.com company. Yeah, this is not that great of a site to go and find annual reports. I think it takes you down a rabbit hole. It's a little bit of a pain. I like to come to the sites that are right at the company's own website. And this one will take me right there. Sometimes I might just go to McCormick.com or whatever and get to their website. And then I'll look for something called Investor Relations or whatever. And that's what this IR stands for, the Investors Relation website. Okay, so I click on that. Oh, it gives me a good old server hang up. Let's see if I renew that, if that'll. Well, there we go. Okay, it brings up this, and this is McCormick's better than some of the other companies, so I'm sorry, you guys may not have it quite so easy. But again, if you have problems finding an annual report, let me know. I haven't failed yet. I'm usually able to find at least some fashion of that. So choose from the list. I'm going to click on that. I just want annual filings. That'll limit this down quite a bit. Filing year, I'll keep that at any, but I wanted to come down because I wanted that 17. Yeah, but the filing date then was probably in 18, right? Because it closed out the year. Their year end is in November, so they closed out the year in November of 17, and they probably filed their 10K. That's what I'm looking for, right? In January of 2018, and I can get a PDF version of it, which I have done. Okay. Then I want to cruise here and show you a couple things. What's important, and I'm trying to make this a little bit quicker, and so I'm not going through everything. But if you start at the top, this one doesn't have a table of contents, which kind of surprised me. Most of them will have a table of contents, and you can kind of click and go right to it. But it's good to read some of this stuff in the first couple pages. It gives you a rough idea of what's going on, right? Your annual reports from year to year to year are going to be in roughly the same format and similar, very similar, if not the same as what I'm looking at here. And so once you've kind of gone through one, you can click through the other ones or scroll through the other ones pretty quickly to find the things that you're looking for. So a couple things I just wanted to kind of point out. I'm going to go to page 24 here. Again, because I've already looked at this, I spent about 45 minutes, an hour, maybe this morning, kind of going through this, and that's the kind of research I expect you to do. But I wanted to just come down. There's management discussions on some of the things that they've done. Right, talks a little bit here about the acquisition. And that's great. This gives me a little bit of background. It doesn't give me all the information. It talks about 4.2 billion net of acquired cash. What that means is that this RB Foods or whatever, they had some cash on their balance sheet, and so McCormick got that, and that was kind of in addition then to that 4.2 billion. But I want to scroll down. These things you should look through in most cases. I had an acquisition on mine, but your company may very well not have something like that. Okay, you may get to someplace and find that your taxes were kind of weird, right? And so you might want to come and let's see. This is on page 24 here. Right, and it talks about the net effect of the tax change and whatnot that happened. And so that could be a big deal on yours. It turns out it wasn't a huge deal here for McCormick. Where that tends to be a big deal, oftentimes it could be with banks, and it could with which nobody did banks, but car companies, equipment manufacturing companies. And the reason for that is that they two different filing systems. They got to do an SEC report, but they also have to pay taxes to the IRS, and the way they show income and expenses and profit for each of those two entities is different, and so sometimes this will explain that. And again, you guys may come across some things where you see some pretty wild things happening on the taxes. You might want to get a hold of me. The tax change that took place under the Trump administration cause some weird kind of things to show up on these, and they're kind of interesting. They're kind of fun to look at, but they can also be somewhat confusing. So just kind of wanted to show that, and then I wanted to go down, and again, you want to scroll through these and read these, depending on what your company, if your company has some things like this, like an acquisition, you'll maybe scroll through and try to figure out where that shows up. In my case here, I come down to page 36. I'm looking at the page up here. I wrote these down so that I could get to it a little bit quicker. And I got financing cash flow. I want to see, what happened. How did they finance the purchase? And this should tell me, right? Net cash provided by financing activity, so 3.756 million, right, or billion, I'm sorry. And their purchase was 4.2 billion, right? So that gives you a rough idea how they financed it. Okay, and they talk about the variability and those types of things. Their net borrowing activity provided cash of 3.5 or almost 3.6 billion, right? And I want to go through that. So in 2017, they issued $4 billion. It'd be $4 billion. They got 4,000 million of long-term debt, which included 2.5 million of notes. Okay, that means those were bonds basically that they sent out to the public, but they also borrowed 1.5 million of term loans, probably from some financial institutions. Net proceeds of the issuance of the long-term debt were about just a little less than 4 million. So they had to pay some fees and whatnot. When you issue bonds, you do that certainly, and they talk about the costs. Okay, that gives me a good idea of the debt side of things that they had for their purchase, right? And that's what I want to express there is don't necessarily get into the full details of that. You might a little bit, that's fine, but you've only got 5 pages, and so it's more important that you read it, and what you report to me is the essence of this thing, right? Hey, they made an acquisition of 4.2 billion. They financed some of that obviously with stock issuance, and maybe we'll find that on here. I'm not sure if I highlighted that, but they also issued $4 billion in new debt, $2.5 billion of bonds, $1.5 billion in loans. Okay, that is probably enough, right? To tell me something like that in terms of the in terms of the debt financing, anyhow, right? Okay. Then I want to go down. Let's see, debt for purchase. So I got page 41. I think just breaks that down a little bit more, and I just kind of wanted to show that. Yeah, page 41. We issued aggregate amount, the 2.5 billion. So that's the senior unsecured notes, or that's the bonds that they sent out, right? And they're due, and it kind of breaks those down a little bit more thoroughly. It tells what their interest rates are and those types of things. Again, I don't know that you need to get into that type of detail on your paper. You'll run out of room if you take this and analyze it to the extent that it's in the annual report, right? An annual report's 100 pages, and I've given you 5 pages, of which a couple pages are going to be devoted to other things. So you got 3 pages maybe that you're going to talk about the finances. So be a little bit discerning. Now that said, write it up. It's easier to go back then and take out some things, delete some things, purge some things that maybe don't need to be in the final. So then I'm going to go to page 61. It talked throughout here about note 6 in the addendums, and if I come down, page 61, again, a lot of this stuff you guys might want to look through. But I get down 60 and 61. This is just such a nice breakdown of what their purchase was, right? So they bought some accounts receivable. They bought some inventories. They bought just a little bit of property, plant, and equipment. But look at how much goodwill. And what's goodwill? That's the price over and above any kind of tangible value, including the value of intangible assets. And what are intangible assets? Probably patents, trademarks, those types of things that RB Foods had. So there's the breakdown of the purchase, which is kind of interesting. And I didn't look. I'm going to pause for a second because I want to go find the breakdown on the equity side of things in terms of the stock that they issued, etc. So give me a second to find that. So I got here to page 53, taking a look at it, the consolidated cash flow statements. That's why cash flows are kind of cool to look at. And this really breaks down, what happened to cash and why, the 4.2 billion was the purchase. They issued about that much in new debt. So why did they issue any additional stock? Well, you kind of go through this. They had 800 million basically from operating income and other things, operating activities. There's your purchase, but they also made some capital expenditures, right? Probably some new plant, equipment, whatever. That's something that they do on a regular basis. So 4.5, their borrowings were 4 billion, but they also paid back some short term, the issuance cost, paid back some long-term debt. There's some notes above that talks about that. And the net that they had for their stock issuance was 554 million, but they also bought back some stock, right? Kind of interesting. And they paid a dividend. So, net cash, their financing activities between the issuance of stock and the debt and everything was only 3.7. So they actually had to lean on their operating cash flow in order to complete that purchase, which did ultimately increase their cash a little bit. So, and again, remember I said there was a cash increase there in that 2020 and year end. Person could come right to the same thing then and figure out why that happened, right? Okay, I think that should be about it for the balance sheet and talking about McCormick there. So let me get this paused for you, or stopped.